This is Gridiron Graduates, a weekly podcast covering all things football. Episode number 41, Time for Revisions. Recorded May 5th, 2016.
And welcome back, my good friends. Another episode of the Grid Grads hitting you back up. Ian Wharton, Bill Rossetti, post-NFL draft. Man, it's hard to believe that one of our favorite times of the NFL calendar year has already come and gone. We build up for months, getting ready for the NFL draft, and then it just comes and goes like that. It's amazing how fast it goes. Ian Wharton, my brother, what's going on, man? Good to have you back as always.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So just kind of working through the fallout now of the NBA or NFL draft, and of course got summer here coming up, NBA playoffs, NBA draft coming, but you know, it's really the best time of the year to kind of recap what happened and process and take everything in from the draft. And, rosters are pretty much set at this point. And, of course, there's some still vets out there on the market that are very intriguing as far as players who might be able to impact the roster still. But for the most part, what you see on that final depth chart is going to be what we see at that training camp 90-man roster.
Mm-hmm. And, you mentioned, you quick blurted out the NBA. Make a quick note of that. Your Cavs, what a run they're on so far. Like you said before we went on the air, they just hit another 3 against Atlanta. It's shaping up to be a potential, could be LeBron versus Dwayne Wade in the East Final. That would be quite an intriguing series there.
I'd love to see it. Obviously, there's no love lost between Heat fans and Cavs fans, so I'd love to see it.
Yeah, it's almost like which jersey do some of those fans wear? Not that all Heat fans are bandwagon. I know there's legit fans up there,
definitely.
Let's be honest for a second. Some just follow LeBron, but hey, that's the fun of it.
Yep.
But we all know Golden State's just going to win it anyway. I mean, my goodness, the way they've been playing without Curry. Whew.
Not so fast, my friend.
I look forward to that West Final, though. I think, whoever comes out of that OKC San Antonio series, it's going to make that series with Golden State very fun and definitely worth watching.
Definitely.
But yeah, so let's jump back into it. By the way, shout out to my Phillies for actually playing well right now. They're actually above 500 as we record this on May 5th. And by the way, on the kiss of death, so probably when you listen to us next week, they'll probably be under 500. Just saying. Anyway, so let's jump into it. What a weekend it was, man. The NFL draft, it came and gone. And it was definitely an exciting 3 days, especially the first round. You know, everyone loves the primetime first round. So I think we'll start off this podcast by kind of going through the first round, talking about what happened, our thoughts, and, some surprises. So start, of course, at the top, which was very melodramatic. Because after the trades were made, we obviously knew who was going to go where for about a week or so. Jared Goff goes to the Rams. Carson Wentz goes to the Eagles. No surprises there. The real surprise started at number 3. Now, not that Joey Bosa wasn't a candidate to be taken by the Chargers, but I think among the candidates that we thought would go to the Chargers, Bosa was probably toward the bottom of the list. Guys like DeForest Buckner, Ronnie Stanley, Jalen Ramsey, we thought those guys would be more likely to get selected by San Diego, but they go with Joey Bosa, which obviously it's not a bad pick. Bosa's a great talent, and there's some people comparing him to J.J. Watt, and he's probably going to play a similar role to J.J. Watt in San Diego's 3-4, so it'll be really fun. And they needed the D-line help too, so it'll be fun to see how Bosa fits in there with San Diego.
Yeah, and it definitely was a surprise just because we really hadn't seen Bosa linked to the Chargers. They did a good job of hiding their interest. Or maybe it was just late interest. Maybe that's all it was. Of course, they didn't really have much to hide at number 3. I mean, they, like you said, they basically had the number 1 pick because they knew who was going to go the first 2 picks, and they didn't really care. It didn't affect them in any way with the quarterbacks going 1-2. So ultimately, I like this pick. It's a little bit different in terms of maybe where we thought they'd go, but it made a lot of sense. Joey Bosa's a heck of a football player. They've got a bunch of good younger pass rushers now, and they need it. Their secondary is very talented, and I think now with Bosa in the mix, you can maybe start to say, well, if this team can stay healthy, which has been a big issue for them, almost randomly throughout the roster, it's just been kind of bizarre how that's worked out. It's just random guys throughout the roster the last couple of years that have been unable to stay on the field. But if Phillip Rivers is upright, they're going to have a chance, even though that they struggled last year. I think this team could turn the corner and maybe be even a playoff team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's not like this is a bad team.
Right.
I mean, injuries just derailed this team in 2015, and that was really the whole reason they only won 4 games last season. Especially the offensive line, if that group can stay together, it's a decent O-line. Dunlap has really turned into a solid left tackle. You've got Fluker that you can still move up and down the line. There's still some talent on this team, and Rivers, and he's got Ken Wisenhunt back as his offensive coordinator, and we know how improved Rivers was a couple seasons ago when Ken was his offensive coordinator. So now that those two are back together, you should see some improvement in what has become a pretty open AFC West. I mean, a lot of people are touting the Raiders, but it's not like they're the clear-cut favorites right now.
Yeah.
This division's up for grabs.
Yeah. There's a lot of good teams in that division. I mean, there's 3 definite good teams, and then you have the Chargers who, like I said, they could be a surprise team. So, I mean, you mentioned the Raiders, too. I like what they've done a lot. I'm a big fan of what they've done, but it's also a lot of new pieces. And sometimes the pieces don't always work perfectly together, especially in the first year.
And a little bit of unknown pressure, too, because it's been a long time since the Raiders have had these sort of expectations that we're starting to put on them.
Yep, and it's a young team. A lot of these guys have not seen that type of expectation and pressure. We see that a lot. Maybe it's a year too early to crown them. Although, admittedly, like I said, it is a strong roster.
Yeah, definitely. So let's move down the line in the draft. Then Dallas did pull the trigger on Ezekiel Elliott at number 4, which let Jalen Ramsey fall to the Jags at 5. And, I really thought Dallas had a shot to go with Ramsey. I pegged them in my final mock, but you can't argue them going Elliott. Elliott to Dallas, I think, was the perfect fit out of any of the top prospects, because him behind that O-line is just downright scary. And I know a lot of people that listen out there love fantasy football. They're already pegging Elliott as mid-first round pick. ESPN has actually already ranked him as their 4th running back overall.
Yeah.
That's saying something. They've only 3 running backs are higher. I believe it was Adrian Peterson, Le'Veon Bell, and I think Todd Gurley.
Yeah.
I think are the only running backs that ESPN right now has ranked ahead of Ezekiel Elliott at running back.
Yeah, and it's a situation where it's not just the offensive line. He's just that good, in my opinion. If I in fantasy, I would take him with the top 5, top 7 pick without a doubt. He's just an incredibly talented player. Landed in a great situation as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how he does. I think this was the right decision for the Cowboys. They've got a limited window to win, and he fits that window. I've gotten rid of the draft idea of I'm going to take a player for the next 10 years. If you can get that, that's great. And you can mention that with certain players, obviously health permitting. But I don't think that applies to many players. If you can get one great contract out of an individual, that's really what you're looking for. Teams are drafting for now. Most coaching staffs don't have the ability to draft for 3, 4, 5 years down the line. They've got to see results now. Obviously, later in the draft, that changes a little bit because it's just supply versus demand. But the first couple days, it's not like Madden where you're drafting a guy for 1 or 2 years down the road. You can take your time, develop him, put him through camps and stuff in the game to get his progression higher. It doesn't work like that in real life, unfortunately. So this made a lot of sense. He's going to make a big impact on them. Ramsey, I think, was the other guy that you could obviously make a strong argument for. But I was actually kind of happy to see Ramsey go to the Jaguars at number 5. I thought this was a really good fit, and it really worked out for the Jags. They've had some tough luck last couple of years as far as some certain players falling to them and kind of getting the bad end of the stick, especially with health and luck. Really looking at Dante Fowler last year. So Ramsey, I think, is a home run pick for them.
Yeah, I love the Ramsey pick, and we'll kind of mention it in a little bit when we kind of talk about teams in general, but I was really happy to see them land Miles Jack too.
Yeah.
Clearly, to me, I mean, I don't really give grades right now because I think it's kind of silly to give a letter grade to a draft class that's only like 5 days old.
Yeah.
But if I'm ranking them, Jacksonville is near the top, if not the top. Just for number one, because of Jalen Ramsey and Miles Jack, who arguably, on a lot of people's boards were 1 and 2, or even 1A, 1B. If that knee holds up, there's a lot of speed on the defense. Then you had Sheldon Day in the 4th, so they got talent there. I know there's people that like that Ngakoue kid that they got in the 3rd.
Mm-hmm. So
they got talent up and down the board. But yeah, Ramsey to help with that secondary. They went out and got Prince Amukamara. And you mentioned the teams draft to win now. Well, that's what Jacksonville's doing. Because they know that this is pretty much the end of the road. This is, it's now or never for Gus Bradley.
Yeah.
If he doesn't get it done now, he's probably not the head coach anymore after this season. We've seen the roster improve. We know the pieces are there. Now it's time for results. Now we've got to start winning some games. That's why they've gone all in. That's why they went and paid big bucks for Malik Jackson, Prince Amukamara. So this is a win now. This is, our time is now. We're all in, and I look forward to it. I hope for their sake they do well. Run through the rest of the top 10. Baltimore at 6 goes with Ronnie Stanley. And we'll talk about a certain gas mask in a little bit. And I know it worked out very well for you, Ian, so we'll get to that in a bit. Excuse me. DeForest Buckner goes 7 to San Francisco. Then Tennessee trades up to number 8. I thought this was going to be Laramie Tunsil, but instead it was Jack Conklin.
Yeah.
Now, I understand the pick. They wanted to play right tackle, but it was still odd for me. I mean, yeah, the Giants probably had interest, so maybe if Tennessee sat at 15, maybe they weren't going to take Conklin, but I don't know. That was a bit of a head-scratcher to me, the move up to number 8. And then the Bears traded up to number 9 to get Leonard Floyd, swiping the Giants again, and then the Giants wound up going with Eli Apple at 10. Another head-scratcher. So the top 10 was, at least the back half of the top 10, was really weird.
Yeah, and I really wasn't a fan of some of the players that went this high. Ronnie Stanley, to me, was a second-round player. Jack Conklin, to me, is a third or fourth-round player. Leonard Floyd, same story, third or fourth-round player. Eli Apple, probably I know he was going to go round 1 no matter what. I don't think he was going to fall much further. NFL teams really like his size and speed, and he's not a bad player. But it was kind of a weird pick for them, even though I think they had a great draft overall. That was kind of a weird way to start it out.
Yeah.
I really wasn't a fan. The only pick I liked from 6 to 10 was actually DeForest Buckner. The rest of the picks, to me, I just don't think that those teams got overall that good of players. I mean, they have strengths and they can contribute in some certain ways, but I mean, they paid a heavy, heavy price to get sort of mediocre players. And that's not the point of drafting in the top 10. The point of drafting in the top 10 is to get studs.
And Baltimore's pretty much already come out and said, maybe not directly, but if the whole video hadn't come out, they were going to take Laramie Tunsil.
Yeah. And that's really, it's kind of a shocking admission.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, and the Dolphins kind of talked about this after the draft, Jimmy Sexton's a really good agent. He's a well-known agent. He represents many of the top players in the NFL. That's what you have an agent for, that you work with, if you trust them. And Mike Tannenbaum, the Dolphins executive vice president, kind of talked about, and that's also the agent for Ndamukong Suh and Adam Gase. And so, they're very familiar with him, and every team should be very familiar with Jimmy Sexton. But Sexton talked about how Tunsil's a really good kid. Tannenbaum talked about how they knew about the video months ago. I mean, this is a years old video. If this video really deterred you from taking the best overall player in this draft and the best overall player in the last 3 draft classes, then that tells me that you didn't do your homework, or that you just maybe have an overly sensitive, situation. I don't really care that the kid smoked pot a couple years ago. Breaking news, most NFL players do. Probably a majority. Once you're tested once for the year, you can just smoke away. That's how it works in the NFL. You get tested once. As long as you're not in the drug program, they don't test again. So guys that were tested on 420, guess what? They can blaze up the rest of the year. So it's really dumb to me that, and I don't know if it's fair or not, and you can talk about morals, you can talk about whatever. Yes, it's against NFL rules, and that's what matters. But it's a couple years ago. We don't know if he continues to do it. He's been very honest throughout the entire draft process. And unlike Todd McShay, who says that that's a sign of immaturity, I actually really respect that. I mean, that's a baffling take from Todd McShay to say that telling the truth is an immature action. I mean, that's crazy to me. I'd much rather have someone that owns it, recognizes it was a mistake.
Absolutely.
What I worry about is, why is there someone that dislikes Laramie Tunsil that much that he would do such horrible, release such an incriminating thing before and after he was picked? Because then they released the messages on Instagram about being paid by coaches. I mean, again, he owned up to it when asked about it, but it's like, man, that's a pathetic life form. Whoever's out there holding that above this kid's head. I mean, I think that was really sad, really, regardless who he went to. But yeah, especially relating back to the Ravens, just kind of a weird explanation. I struggle with. I mean, of all the things that you're gonna put up with high level talent, I mean, his baggage is really not that much. It was just kind of amplified on the stage of the draft because someone released that video.
Mm-hmm. And now the unfortunate thing is he's now already going to be under the watchful eye of the NFL. He's not in any trouble or anything, but the NFL has already said they're going to keep an eye on him. So
yeah, and then that's a little bit of lip service. I mean, there's nothing they can do. He's not in a drug program.
Right.
So I mean, it's just a big bag at NFL. Trying to, I don't know. The NFL's just really weird with discipline, but they can't do anything to him unless if he tests positively for a drug. So he's fine. He's fine.
Yeah, and a lot of these teams just love to overreact to things too.
It is. They punish.
To it.
And they punish kids really for strange things at times. They'll take Frank Clark in the second round last year after domestic abuse, domestic violence, I should say. But then they won't draft a kid because they didn't like his personality or something. You know what I mean? It's just it's very odd how they punish people for certain instances. I'm
sorry.
No, you're good.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting point. Like, before we get back into talking about the picks, I want to bring up another kid that, when I saw he was picked, Twitter exploded. And that was Tyler Higbee in the 4th round.
Yeah.
I know you, for one, was like, how the hell did this kid not only get drafted, but get drafted in the 4th round?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and some of it's he said, she said. Sounds like he may even get off on the charges, but, this was someone that was reportedly said, again, this may have been unconfirmed, but John Ledyard, actually, a friend of the show, had said that he had talked to people that were actually at the bar the night of the incidents, confirming that he used some pretty nasty racial slurs against Muslim Americans. And I don't tolerate anything like that. I think that stuff's pretty disgusting. And for him to go in the 4th round to Los Angeles, and if he really feels that way about people of that faith, that was shocking to me. Let alone that the guy, the stranger may have been drunk and he may have been bothering his girlfriend. Well, there's still a better way to handle that. Mm-hmm. You can handle that like a man, and not resort to violence, especially when you're 6'4", 240 pounds. You need to show some restraint and not knock somebody out with a punch. Like, unless if you're physically in danger, you need to handle yourself a little bit better, or just don't be out 2 weeks before the draft.
Right, that's the thing.
That's a judgment thing. Yeah. But this is Jeff Fisher. This is Jeff Fisher's MO. He takes shitty characters. He takes people that that do these type of things off the field, and it's more of the same from Jeff Fisher. So I was really disappointed. I was really disappointed with the NFL. Again, regardless of whether he gets off the charge or not, the whole incident just reeks of poor character to me. And I was just surprised that someone would invest a 4th round pick, especially when they didn't have another pick in between Jared Goff and Tyler Higbee. Right. That was just stunning to me. So overall, again, I did like their draft. Tyler Higbee's a heck of a talent, but I just couldn't believe that they took him.
So let's get back into the first round. We'll talk about picks 11 through 15. So Tampa, they drop back to 11, and they still get their guy in Vernon Hargreaves. New Orleans at 12 takes Sheldon Rankins, the D tackle from Louisville. And then the steal of the first round, and possibly the steal of the draft, Miami gets Laramie Tunsil at 13. Then we talked about Oakland before. They added Carl Joseph, the safety out of West Virginia. And then Cleveland, after dropping back to 15, the first of their bajillion trade downs during the 3-day event, they take the first receiver off the board, and it's Corey Coleman out of Baylor. Got to start with the Tunsil pick because, like I said, just the value that they end up getting for him at 13 for arguably the best player in this class. Again, people's boards are going to be different. Some people say Tunsil's the best. Some are going to say Ramsey. Some are going to say Jack. Tunsil, without a doubt, was a great talent. And to get him at 13, and you probably think this too, Brandon Albert probably doesn't have too many years left. So at least now there's a contingency plan at left tackle. You have Jawan James, which is kind of meh, or Dallas Thomas, or whoever you have at left or at right tackle. But to get a player of Tunsil's talent this late in the draft, I mean, obviously it's not late, but in terms of talent and position, an arguably top 3 player at 13 is like, it's Christmas in April.
Yeah. I mean, I was stunned. Never would I think that he'd be available at that point in the draft. Home run pick. Now, what they're going to do with him apparently is they're planning on using him at left guard, which I think is really silly. Now, he fits into a zone blocking scheme, and, he can be probably effective as a left guard there. It's stunning to me why you would move him to left guard when he is so clearly the left tackle of the future. Why you would move him for 1 year there where that's not his greatest strength. His strength is more athleticism and the ability to protect the edge and also to use his length and great technique and pass protection. He's not really an impactful run defender. He's not a poor run defender, but he's also not a mauler that latches on really well. That's just not his game. So why you would move him into guard is really strange to me. Brandon Albert was a guard in college. He was an All-Pro. He was an All-American guard. Obviously, he's been a great tackle as well. But 2016 is probably his final season in Miami with his salary and the injuries that he's had. He can't stay healthy for an entire year. And so keeping him at tackle is just going to open him up to more injuries. And he's got the history at guard. I think you just move him inside to guard, protect him, get Tunsil out at left tackle, start that process, and he may be your left tackle for 10 years. He's probably one of the only few guys I would talk about for the next decade in this draft, and where I feel comfortable saying that he's that good, where we can plan on him being on the field for the next 10 years for my team. So I love the pick because, again, long-term you're taking care of a huge need, but I am a little bit questionable as far as usage, but it's just kind of fitting for the Dolphins. I mean, the Dolphins have made a lot of decisions like this in past years, so I'm hopeful that they will let this play out on the field in training camp, kind of like General Manager Chris Greer had talked about, that the coaches will figure it out later. But I am glad that they decided to take the best talent available because it is a long-term need for that left tackle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as far as like some of the other picks in that range, I like the Carl Joseph fit in Oakland too. They really are starting to build up that secondary. You brought in Sean Smith in free agency, you signed Reggie Nelson. Now you've got Carl Joseph, one of the top safeties. So this is another team that feels like they're going all in, especially on that defense, because they really tried to beef up that defense. They also took Jihad Ward, the D tackle out of Illinois, in round 2. So really will be interesting to see what plays out there. Cleveland kind of goes with the Baylor connection between Robert Griffin now and Corey Coleman. So adding some talent to the Brown, to that offense and their analytics. I think it's almost like you have to say the Browns and their analytics, otherwise you're not being like official enough anymore.
Yeah, it was an interesting draft for them, especially in terms of that narrative and analytics, because you're right, media loves to say the Browns and their analytics, when in reality is what it played out is that they found that there may be undervalued players who produce at a high level in college, which is really interesting because these are just basic stats. These are just, go to google.com, search Corey Coleman stats, and you're bringing up the first stats page that you find. These aren't analytics, and that's the thing about analytics. People get freaked out about them. All it is just making more informed decisions. That's it. Using numbers to find out what are people missing on, where's the market inefficiency, what are people undervaluing compared to what actually works in the NFL. So they had a really interesting draft from that standpoint because obviously I think people expected them to take maybe like people from, I don't know, D3 schools over top D1 talent because the analytics say so. No, the analytics just proved that they wanted productive players. And now there's obviously negatives to that, especially some of the players they took I think are limited as athletes. And we can get into that a little bit more when we touch on the teams. But really interesting draft haul for them. But I did like this pick with Corey Coleman. I think that was a great way to start off their draft.
16 through 20 went Taylor Decker to Detroit, Keanu Neal to Atlanta, Ryan Kelly, the center from Alabama, to the Colts. The Bills take Shaq Lawson, the Clemson D-end, at 19, and the Jets go with Darren Lee, the Ohio State linebacker. Here was where I found another one of my surprises in round 1, because I was a little surprised at the Keanu Neal pick to the Falcons, only because I didn't expect, and again, a lot of this is media-driven, but Keanu Neal to me was a little bit of a surprise at 17. There was a bit of a need at safety, but I thought maybe they'd go pass rush in round 1, especially with a guy like Darren Lee there. But nonetheless, Keanu Neal fits in there, and the Falcons have certainly moved quickly. It was actually at the time of recording this, it was just a little bit ago that Adam Schefter tweeting that the Falcons have already signed their entire draft class, which is pretty amazing. But with the new CBA, well, we can't really say new CBA, we're 6 years into it. But the CBA has definitely made it a lot easier for teams to sign their picks. So, I've already got one first-round pick locked and loaded. As far as the other picks, I thought I like the Decker fit in Detroit. I think you could plug him in at right tackle. If you decide to keep Reef at left tackle, and then, maybe down the line you groom Decker into the left. You never know. Colts, they badly needed O-line help, so Kelly and the buzz toward the draft was starting to point in that direction. Bills, you get the added pass rush in Lawson, and then Darren Lee. We've talked about him before, kind of that rangy linebacker that it seems like the NFL is kind of looking for now in linebackers. So I'll be curious to see his fit with Todd Bowles and that Jets defense.
Yeah, some solid picks in here. I thought that Keanu Neal pick, he may have been the worst player taken in the first round. Either him or Jack Conklin for me were probably the two worst players taken. But he'll fit what they want to do. And as long as they have Dan Quinn as defensive mind there, obviously as head coach, that's what kind of matters. Now, if they ever change defenses, that's going to be an issue. He's very one-dimensional, but I think he'll be able to use him in a Cam Chancellor-type role near the line of scrimmage. I am surprised that they passed on Darren Lee and Shaq Lawson. I just think those were two much better players who played positions at a similar need. So that was kind of a head-scratching decision. But I really like the Kelly pick to the Colts, and I like Lawson and Lee to the Bills and Jets, respectively.
And I think I got this from one of the articles you wrote after round one, in that, in talking about the Falcons, Keanu Neal and their second-round pick, Deion Jones, don't exactly complement each other well.
Yeah.
And you thought they were, pretty interesting picks for the Falcons. So it sounds like that'll be something to watch as far as how those two kind of work together on the field, if they're on the field together, or, how Quinn kind of wants to mix and match there.
Yeah, they're just kind of a weird fit because Neal's really bad in coverage. He's almost just like a weak side linebacker. And that's Deion Jones, and Deion Jones isn't really a good tackler. He's very light for the position. So they're almost like two strong safety / weak side linebacker crossovers. If you could combine them into one player, I think you'd have a heck of a player. But two players with such major negatives is going to be really difficult to hide on passing downs. I just thought that was strange why they would pick such similar players. You could have taken Darren Lee, who's better in coverage than Jones, and then you could have taken a lesser safety with more coverage range. And that makes your defense a little bit more like Seattle, what he had in Seattle, where you can do a lot of unique things and be less scheme dependent. But now they're more scheme dependent because they've got to figure out a way how to hide those two in certain plays.
So that was the non-playoff teams. We'll now get into the playoff teams. We'll go 21 through 25, and this, of course, is where the wide receiver run began, as 3 straight receivers went off the board. Houston moved up one spot. They flip-flopped with Washington to get Will Fuller out of Notre Dame. So a little surprising to see Fuller as the second receiver off the board after Coleman. Then Washington dropped down to 22. And really, Houston didn't even give up that much. I mean, a 6th rounder in 2017, and how much value do you really give a future draft pick, especially one that late? It can't be much. It's almost like next to nothing.
Yeah.
For Houston to move up one spot, but at least Washington gained something, and they get Josh Doctson, who obviously is a favorite of us here on GG. So that's a nice playmaker for Kirk Cousins to throw to. The question now, will they keep all 3 receivers, or is one of Garcon or Deshaun Jackson gone? A lot of people are saying maybe Pierre Garcon's on his way out. It'll be interesting to watch as we get into camp. But right now, if you keep all three, it's not bad. Then Laquan Treadwell, who a lot of people thought was the best receiver, ends up the fourth receiver off the board. He goes to Minnesota. So congrats, Teddy Bridgewater. William Jackson, one of your favorite corners, goes 24th to the Bengals. And then a bit of a surprise pick, Artie Burns, the corner out of Miami, 25 to the Steelers.
Yeah, a lot of interesting picks here, like you mentioned. I think the receiver run was fascinating. We had heard that Will Fuller would go early, and he did. I'm really the Doxson pick to the Redskins. I like that a lot, and I talked about this in an article a couple months ago. And Scott McLuhan, and Redskins fans didn't like to hear this, but Scott McLuhan obviously completely agrees. As we saw Jordan Reed get a huge extension today too. You've got to make huge investments around a quarterback like Kirk Cousins. He's too limited to not give him elite weapons. He has to have phenomenal weapons around him to be effective. And that's what they're doing. And that's okay. As long as you understand that that's the limitation and that's the sacrifice you've got to make with that type of quarterback, it's doable. I think they probably keep these veteran receivers. Again, you might as well. You've got the money. Now, obviously, cutting Garcon would be nice. I think they'd save anywhere between $6 and $8 million. So that'd be fantastic. But on the same breath, you're trying to get back to the playoffs, and cutting him does not help that goal. So it's a fine line there. You've got the money by cutting Chris Culliver. That makes that possible. And so I think that we probably see them carry a loaded wide receiver room. I think Andre Roberts maybe could be the more likely vet receiver to be cut.
What do you think about the Artie Burns pick to Pittsburgh? Because to me, that felt like a mix of a reach and maybe a panic move after the Bengals had taken Jackson, or was there maybe a little bit of interest there in Burns to begin with?
There was probably some. I think there's definitely interest in him in that range. It just wasn't a good cornerback class, and that kind of makes teams become trigger happy. Mm-hmm. And Steelers they need the talent in the secondary. They seem to be changing what they want to do in that secondary, despite drafting a couple guys last year in the middle rounds. They're seemingly already changing what they want to do. So, they needed someone back there to start working on and start developing a little bit. So it made sense from that aspect. I don't think the talent was worth the pick, and that's always a concern. But, it made sense, though, as far as what the team needs and kind of where they're headed in a direction. Defensively and in terms of identity, they kind of needed to take someone in that secondary. So it made sense.
And then wrapping up the first round, the last 6 picks, Denver trades up from 31 to 26 to take Paxton Lynch. So there's your quarterback. There's your new quarterback, Broncos fans. Now, I think Mark Sanchez is going to start come week 1, which, hey, what a bang for the NFL to start their season. Nothing like Cam Newton versus Mark Sanchez. Yeah, that'll get people raring to go. Butt fumble, yay!
Yeah, I think we see Paxton Lynch win that job pretty easily. Even in a simplified offense, he's just simply more talented. And a ton of natural talent in his body, 6'7", 245 pounds. I really like Paxton Lynch. He was my number 2 quarterback in the class. He needs work. He needs time. But there's no better situation than Denver to give it to him, because they're going to put elite weapons around him. And obviously the defense is going to make it so that their pressure's to a minimum on the offense. So this is a really nice move for them. There was talk that Dallas was trying to trade up as well. Couldn't get the deal done. For Denver, this is just, I like this move a lot. Lynch is a risk, but, every quarterback is. And he's at least got natural talent oozing through his veins.
Mm-hmm. So Lynch goes to Denver, 26. Kenny Clark, the defensive tackle at UCLA, goes 27 to the Packers. The 49ers trade back into round 1, making a move with the Chiefs to take Joshua Garnett, the guard out of Stanford, at 28. Cardinals taking a risk on Robert Nkemdiche at 29th overall. A classic win now type move for the Cardinals. Again, they know their window is small. You know how close they were to the Super Bowl and how badly they got blown out. So they're hoping Nkemdiche can come in and help them get over that hump and maybe help lead them to a Super Bowl. We'll see. Vernon Butler, the D tackle from Louisiana Tech, goes to the Panthers at 30. Does that mean Kawan Short could be on his way out after this season? We'll see. And then Seattle at 31 makes it 4 years in a row that a Texas A&M offensive tackle gets taken in round 1 as they go with Jermaine Ifedi to close out round 1.
Yeah, I mean, some of these, I feel like were so obvious that they were going to happen. At least in terms of like the position, and specifically Kenny Clark to the Packers. When the
Fed Seattle for me.
Yeah, that's definitely one that I had predicted. I wish they would keep him at right tackle instead of guard. I think he's more of I think he's got such upside at tackle that you try to make it work at tackle before moving him to guard. So I'm a little bit disappointed in that, but those two really made a lot of sense to me. Josh Garnett made a lot of sense to me with the 49ers. They had a ton of picks. You might as well trade up and use some of those picks. Get the guy that you really want to help you win right away. And, Vernon Butler to the Panthers was really interesting. I mean, obviously I love Robert Nkemdiche. I'm not going to pass over him. I think he's a top 5 talent in this class overall. So that was a heck of a pick by them. They're going to maximize him. But Vernon Butler's the interesting one, like you mentioned. Who is going to be the guy that he replaces? That's what that pick tells me. He can be in a rotation this year, but you don't make that pick without thinking long term he's going to earn a starting job.
And we know the Panthers have already picked up the 5th-year option on Star Lotulelei, so they've got that extra year. So that's what I'm saying. Chances are it could be.
It's definitely one of them. It's
definitely going to be one of Short or Star.
Because the thing is that Short's going to probably get $100 million, or at least close to.
And he's a free agent after this season.
Yeah. So now they can cut Lutulele or they can trade him, but I think he's going to probably get upwards of $60 to $80 million as well. So you can't carry both. You can't do that. You can't have two guys making $15, $20 million a year at the same position. It's too much money. So this just made too much sense. As far as after 2016, you're probably picking one of those guys and then trading the other or just letting the other walk.
And with that wrapped up the first round. We'll kind of go through and talk about some of the picks. I do want to get your thought, because we talked about the Dolphins and how you were so happy that they took Laramie Tunsil, and it felt like, based on some of your tweets, as happy as you were that they took Tunsil, that happiness kind of subsided when they took Xavier Howard. Are you okay with the Howard pick?
I'm okay with the talent. I just, it's hard for me as someone, I'm more of an analyst than like a journalist or anything like that. I don't report things too often. I have to look at things in a more process type way, more of the business type manner, and that's where Miami failed this draft. Is they took a couple of sub-package offensive players such as Kenyon Drake and then Jakeem Grant. There's not really a niche for that in the NFL. Philadelphia really has the premier version. They've got Darren Sproles, but how many Darren Sproles are there in the NFL? There's not really many, if any, other that really work like him. It's very difficult to manufacture touches for players like Drake and Grant because they're not effective without almost like a gimmick or scheming it open for them. So that's my concern with that. And they devoted 2 picks to players like that. And Drake came at a heavy cost in the 3rd round. There was one running back picked between the 73rd overall pick and the 149th overall pick. Those 2 picks, that's Kenyon Drake at 73, CJ Prosise I think at 89, and then Kenneth Dixon at 149. So that's a huge range. That's a team to me that says, They didn't properly gauge where the running back run was going to start. They did the same thing with Xavier Howard, who's a nice player, but they traded a 4th-round pick to move up 5 spots for him. That's unbelievable. That's horrible value. And they mistimed the run. They misjudged it. It was 20 more picks before another cornerback was selected after Howard. So it's a team, and then they did it again with Leonte Carew. They traded way too many assets for him, although I like him a lot. I think he's going to be maybe even a starter by the end of the season. They traded a 3rd, 4th, and a 4th-round pick next year and a 6th-round pick for him. They essentially gave up the comp picks for Olivier Vernon and Lamar Miller that they were going to receive next year for Leonte Carew. That's just crazy to me for a player who doesn't have elite upside. So that's what my concern was with this draft, is I felt like they just gave up way too much value to try to win right now, and that's a dangerous method in the NFL.
Just going through some of the round 2 picks, and certainly some of the surprises. Jalen Smith at 34. Really surprising that the Cowboys pulled the trigger on him this early, but we all know he's a top 5 talent if he's healthy. We hope he's healthy. Hopefully that knee comes around, and if it does, that'll be really fun to watch him in Dallas. Then we talked about Miles Jack. Jags trade up to get him. Really like that landing spot for him because we knew the Jags had been interested in Jack for quite some time. So for them to get him and Ramsey, that's going to be a fun defense to watch. Tampa gets Noah Spence in round 2. I thought that was a good pick. They needed some pass rush help. Giants getting Sterling Shepard. The Bills trading up for Reggie Ragland. And then the big shock for me was that, well, before I get that, I want to talk about my guy, Mackenzie Alexander. I was glad to see his fall end at 54 to the Vikings, which is a nice landing spot. He'll get a chance now to work with Mike Zimmer. And then the big shock for me, Christian Hackenberg, 51st overall to the New York Jets. If you're going to take a quarterback, why not just take Paxton Lynch when he was sitting there right for you at number 20? But nope, they go with Hackenberg as the 4th quarterback on the board, with Cook still on the board, and all the other quarterbacks.
Yeah, and
that was a stunner.
And the crazy part was, too, is after the pick, the general manager of the Jets came out, and he talked about he didn't really like any of the other players on the board, so they just kind of took Hackenberg. I mean, that's unbelievable. Like, it was a crazy reach. We knew Hackenberg was going to go way too high. It's weird to me, his situation. A lot of people like to make excuses for him. He played horribly over the last couple of years, so it's gonna be really interesting to see. I think they've got 3 bad quarterbacks on the roster right now: Geno Smith, Bryce Petty, and Christian Hackenberg. So, for their sake, they better hope that they can get back Mr. Ryan Fitzpatrick, which is saying something because he's not especially good either.
Yeah, this is what it's come to, that they need to re-sign Ryan Fitzpatrick to be relevant. Because if they can't get him, this is maybe a 6-win team.
Yeah,
at best.
Which is crazy because it's a good roster and it's a really good, well-coached team. But it's just you can't win with bad quarterbacks like that.
And then that's some of the other picks. As I kind of run through some of the rounds. LaRaven Clark, I'll just mention him quick, the tackle from Texas Tech. I know there was a little bit of talk about him. So the Colts definitely knew they wanted to upgrade the offensive line, spending 2 of their first 3 picks on offensive line. Braxton Miller goes to the Texans. And as an Ohio State fan, I'm sure you were quite pleased with the first 3 rounds. 10 Buckeyes, I believe, went in the first 3 rounds?
I think so. It was either 10 or 11.
10 or 11.
So, yeah, I mean, great weekend for the Buckeyes and Urban Meyer.
And then the funny thing, too, was late in the third round, the Lions come on the clock and they take Graham Glasgow, the center out of Michigan. And Rich Eisen is so excited because he was like, we finally got one. It was like after 10 Buckeyes go off the board, here's the first Wolverine off the board.
And yeah, I mean, they're going to have some more next year. You know, Jim Harbaugh is building some special things in Michigan, in all respect to them. But yeah, I mean, it just kind of highlights where their program has been at the last few years.
And then we get into day 4, a couple notable picks. Connor Cook goes to the Raiders at number 100. Oh, they actually traded up, jumped over Dallas to get Cook. I know a lot of people were surprised at the Connor Cook pick, but if you think about it, who is the backup quarterback in Oakland? Do you really feel comfortable with someone like Matt McGloin or whoever else was there? You know, at least with Connor Cook, you have a chance to develop him and let him be the backup to Derek Carr. So at least you give yourself a little bit of a chance at that position. Then we talked about the Tyler Higbee pick. Pharaoh Cooper, just because that name's pretty cool. Then, of course, the best part of the draft, at least on day 3, was when Willie Beavers was selected by the Vikings, and then the Bears took Deion Bush. And the guys at NFL Network lost it because of the whole Beavers and Bush thing. I don't know if you saw that or not, but they did the whole Beavers and Bush thing, and they all just started busting out laughing. Rich Eisen even asked his producers to go to break because they were going nuts.
It's funny. I had actually missed that.
Like, we were all sitting there thinking, like, what the hell is going on? And then when we figured out that it was, you know, 2 guys named Beavers and Bush, we were like, oh.
Yeah.
Hey, it's the inner child in all of us.
Yeah, that's
what
true.
What the hell?
That is true.
You know, we could be immature if we want. This is sports, damn it. This is the NFL draft.
Yeah, I had switched back over to ESPN by that point, but that is really funny.
Let me scroll through. You know, Kenneth Dixon goes to the Ravens at 134. Then the Cowboys finally take their quarterback in Dak Prescott. Devontae Booker goes to the Broncos. Cardale Jones to the Bills. I also like the Andrew Billings pick in round 4.
Yeah, I
thought that was also good value too.
Yeah, really good value.
Bengals. And then a shout out to this year's Mr. Irrelevant, Kalon Reed, cornerback, Southern Miss, 253rd overall to the Titans. So shout out to them. And before we have to talk about this too. The trade for the kicker. How could I forget about
unbelievable.
that? The Buccaneers not only selected a kicker in round 2, but they traded up 15 spots to get him.
Yeah. Really bizarre. Especially because, like, they had a good draft outside of that. It's just to move up for a kicker, and Roberto Aguayo is really a solid prospect, but I think he's like 5 of 9 past 40 yards. Which is bizarre to me. Like, that's great that he's amazing inside 40 yards, but I mean that should be concerning that he's not like almost perfect past 40 to 50 yards. So, and then to move up for the kick, that's the thing. To take him in the second round is fine. Honestly, I have no problem with that. But to move up for him, that was such a strange decision for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I even messaged you on Twitter. I was like, can we just talk about the Buccaneers? Can we just laugh at the Buccaneers for the entire podcast? I mean, if it pans out for them, good.
Yeah, and I hate to do that because, you know, they had a good draft. Like, Noah Spence was a heck of a pickup in the second round. Yep. Vernon Hargraves is going to play for them right away. Aguayo's going to help their team, too. I mean, it's not like he's not needed, but he's not going to be... I don't know if he's going to be that much of a difference maker, though.
And I try to look at it this way. How many times do NFL games come down to a final field goal?
Yeah.
And now, with the extra points permanently being 33 yards, it was just like a kind of temporary rule, like a test out sort of last year. Now it's permanent. So now they're looking for kickers. You know.
It's gonna be rough for him though. Like if he ever misses kicks, because you know what the first thing the fans are gonna say is that, oh, when we moved up for this guy too.
Yeah.
Like,
there's a lot of pressure now because he was a second-round pick. It's not like this kid was like an undrafted or even a seventh-round pick. This was a second-round pick.
yeah, and that they moved up for.
That they moved up. Let me just double-check what number. It was 59.
59.
So this was a top. It's not even like this. We're not even talking like top 100. This was top 60.
Yep.
You know, that's big time. So, but overall, we'll kind of wrap things up. I talk about some of the teams. Again, we talked about the Jaguars and how excellent their draft was. I thought, despite the surprise of Eli Apple in the first round, who, you know, maybe living in New York, he can learn how to cook. But other than that, I thought the Giants had a nice couple picks afterwards. I like the Sterling Shepard pick in the second. I like Darian Thompson in the third. So I thought the Giants did well. Oakland was interesting. You know, the Vikings, I like their top two picks. Again, you know, Treadwell to finally help out Bridgewater, I think. And, you know, again, I mentioned Alexander getting to work with Mike Zimmer. Indy talked about how they tried to build up their offensive line. And Ohio State. Shout out, I mean, I hate to say this, but shout out to Ohio State for however. I mean, I didn't get the actual number of players that were drafted, but boy, what a weekend they had for sure.
Yeah, they're the real winners. But I mean, I do think that it was either a hate it or love it type of draft for me. Instant reaction type of feel. I don't necessarily disagree that you can't grade a draft after it. I just think that the proper context is needed to do so.
Right.
You know, if you evaluate prospects and you have a good idea of the team needs and the team schemes and kind of where the players fit into that, then, you know, that makes you qualified then to be able to judge kind of what this draft looks like at this time. Now, you're always able to go back and revisit and say, okay, you know, now that I have more information, this looks like a different way, and that's going to happen. But you know, for the most part, I liked a good amount of drafts. Some of these drafts I just didn't understand, and a couple of the drafts I really liked as long as you went back and said, okay, forget where they took Christian Hackenberg, you know, Jets specifically. They had a great draft. If you just made a list of all the players that they took and forget where they were taken. And that's hard to do sometimes, and I understand that, but I think that is kind of important when you have a strong draft class, that, yeah, they might have overpaid for that player, but then they got X, Y, and Z players at a really good value. So,
right.
You know, look at the full class and say, okay, you know, overall, yeah, Hackenberg might not be good, but if he does work out, well, then all of a sudden that good class becomes a home run. And there's nothing wrong with hitting a double or a triple in the draft. If you can get 3 or 4 contributors over the next 3 to 5 years, then you've had a great draft.
Yeah, like Jordan Jenkins in the third, like, and even Mike Mayock mentioned this. You know, all the focus was on Leonard Floyd, but I know there are a lot of people that like Jenkins. You know, who, you know, I'm even looking at the, you know, team by team picks, and I'll read what Mike Mayock said. Leonard Floyd got all of the attention, but this kid did all the dirty jobs, talking about Jordan Jenkins. So, and I'll quickly, you know, for all my Eagles fans out there, I'll give a bit of a take on their draft. I can't say I've really watched all these players. Tell one name I can't even pronounce. But in talking to some people, their third-round pick of Isaac Siumalu is really good. He's a guy that can step in the guard and, you know, help add to that depth.
You're talking about the TCU tackle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hala Pulivati Vaitai. I don't know.
It's a good effort.
Good job, good effort. Big V. Okay, Pick analysis. Call him Big V. I'm going to call him Big V. I'm not even going to... There you go. Offensive tackle from TCU, 6'6", 320. So certainly you can tell that they wanted to address the offensive line a little bit, taking 2 of those. Jalen Mills, they get in the 7th round, and I knew he was a guy some people were talking about as a really good player. But I guess off-field issues caused him to fall all the way down to the 7th. Alex McAllister seems like another kid who has some talent, and they picked him in the 7th. So overall, not a terrible draft. Not flashy names. Picking up a guy like Wendell Smallwood in the 5th. But, I mean, maybe they had interest in him, but maybe it also helped the fact that 2 of the top running backs in the class went about 5 or 6 picks ahead of them in Paul Perkins and Jordan Howard. But like I said, overall, not a bad draft class. We'll see how it plays out. So should be fun.
Absolutely, and I did like the Eagles draft as far as although I'm not a big Wentz fan. He's going to be the one that determines what the outlook of this class will be. But I do like that they're reinvesting at the offensive line position. That's paramount that happened. So we'll see how those kids work out. Young linemen rarely have huge success, but to continue to bolster talent, add some depth, maybe even add a potential starter, that's huge. And they're making an effort to try to be great, and I can appreciate that. Even if I may not like Carson Wentz that much as a prospect, I at least appreciate trying to go big and trying to get your guy.
Absolutely. So with that, I think that'll wrap things up. I think it was some good talk there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was a fun draft. It was very unpredictable, which makes it a lot of fun in terms of as a fan, as a spectator, as an analyst. It was a lot of fun to watch, and I think that there were some great values found on day 3 and some big-time reaches in round 1, and so that's going to make it a lot of fun to kind of see if that bears out true on the field.
Absolutely. So with that, I think we'll wrap things up. Any final thoughts, Ian?
I don't think so. It's been a lot of fun. To be determined on, what the summer will bring. But, we're kind of in that NFL off-season mode now, where not much news is going to come out between now and training camp. If everything goes according to plan, which, hey, it's the NFL, they're able to keep a year-round information stream, it seems, and so maybe that won't go according to what we're planning on. But no, it's been a fun season. This really kind of wraps up the 2016 or 2015 season, as now it's all about 2016 and beyond.
Yep, full speed ahead. So with that, I want to thank you guys as always for listening, and thank Ian as always for joining me and having some great convos. And remember, hit us up on Twitter. He's at NFL Film Study. I'm at Bill_Rossetti. And shout out to a couple of my local friends, Nick Petrone and Mark Scarcella, a couple local buddies of mine getting back into the podcast business. Go check out their podcast, The Sports Grind with Nick and Mark. So good luck to you two guys. Shout out. And with that, thanks for listening to GG, and we'll see you next time. Take care, my friends. Thanks.